Welcome back to the Peer Perspective Podcast. I'm your host, Kyle Van Blericom. I'm really excited to share this next episode with you, but before we get started, if you or someone you know might benefit from today's story, please share. Your support means the world. My next guest, Tanya Kraege, I've had the opportunity to hear speak on multiple occasions. She's the founder of a tech company, the director of peer services for an organization based out of Madison, as well as a trainer for the Wisconsin Peer Support Employment Initiative. Tanya's story is incredibly inspiring. She has overcome a lot in her life and come out the other side. She's an inspiration. I can't say enough about her. I was so grateful that she was willing to share. Without further ado,
Just a brief introduction. My name is Tanya Kraege. My pronouns are she, her, hers. For those who may be visually impaired, today I am wearing some earrings that say Mary Era, a red sweater that says Mary in white lettering. I'm a blonde white woman with green eyes, and I'm in a blurred out background currently. Uh, I have a few different hats that I get to wear. I am currently the Director of Peer Services at Safe Communities in Madison, Wisconsin. I also get the opportunity to facilitate trainings for certified peer specialists around the state. Historically, I have had the opportunity also to train recovery coaches for CCAR. I've kind of let that kind of go to the wayside only due to capacity wise, but I have a firm understanding of the curriculum as well as the CPS or Certified Peer Specialist curriculum for Wisconsin so that I can support my team the best in kind of what their roles are and what they're doing in their respective roles. And then I also launched a tech company for peer services about, I think it's 2 years ago now. It's kind of been a whirlwind. That wasn't an expected endeavor of mine by any means. I am not a techie person. I am a social worker by trade and fell into the peer space, about 7.5 years ago. On my head, probably, I would say. I fell on my head. But we were having data challenges and kind of developed our own system for tracking work and it works really well for us. And so I wanted to be able to share it with other spaces that were having similar challenges. So we launched Ventus Rex is the name of the company that houses Rex, which is the software, so that we could help other people. And I don't have a ton of time, so I let somebody else kind of manage a lot of that stuff for us today so that I can be present for my team and the work that I get to do over here. A little bit about myself. Geez, I grew up very poor. I come from an unmarried couple. My mom got pregnant with me when she was 17. She had been in foster care when she got pregnant, and so she had lost her own parents at a pretty early age herself due to substance use and other challenges in our family. And then my biological dad, I have other names for him, but I don't really have a relationship with him. But he, wasn't really in my life. He was a fairly volatile individual. And my mom didn't have a lot of skills on how to raise a child, or children, therefore, because there's been three that have come after me. But I grew up mostly in and out of the home due to, inability to care for us or me and my siblings. We were oftentimes left with caregivers that we didn't really know very well, but my mom considered them friends, and mostly that she had met like in spaces that she was hanging out with. And then I say about 5, I think I started kind of taking on the role of caretaker for my family, like learning how to cook, learning how to clean, ensuring that mom was up to like go to whatever job she had at the time. And so really, took that matriarchal kind of responsibility very seriously at a young age and had a lot of responsibility. There was a lot of trauma, neglect, abandonment stuff from an early age. Of course, I didn't, know this at the time. That didn't come until way later through a lot of exploration. But really, what I recall very distinctly is feeling like I was surviving and never really feeling safe. Um, I never, I didn't feel lovable and I didn't understand. I remember so much because my aunt was a big part of the church and she sometimes was one of those people that would kind of come in and take care of me at times. Which another interesting piece there was that I didn't know she was my aunt. I grew up believing she was my nana, which was my grandma. She was my mom's foster mom, and she was actually my dad's biological sister. And so that's kind of how they like ended up, together or whatever. I don't even know that you'd call it together. But I just remember feeling really unworthy and unlovable. And I remember like questioning God because she was like a God-fearing woman and just being like, if God loved me, like why would he bear me into this family? Like why did I get this and these other kids didn't get these things? So a lot of feelings of like inadequacy, not feeling safe, not feeling worthwhile. Um, and part of that in retrospect, developed this other piece of me that was very like people pleasing and caretaking and trying to like hustle for my worth. If I got like really good grades, then maybe then my mom wouldn't go to the bar so much, or she'd be home. If I cleaned the house really well, she'd want to be around the house more. Um, and that just kind of carried over for a while. At the age of 11, I met who I call my angel. So when we talk about like those things that really stand out at like these conjunctures in your life, um, I was paired up with a college student at Lawrence University out of Appleton. I was living up there at the time with my aunt, and it was mostly like a program similar to Big Brothers Big Sisters, but for like talented and gifted kids and who like were struggling like emotionally, right? And I was definitely one of those kids who was like struggling emotionally. Like I was a fighter, right? And that was a fighter in a lot of ways, whether it was with my words or my fists or whatever. And I grew up kind of in the streets, and so that was the thing, that we just had to like earn respect in those ways. And so I'm this kid who's like fighting, and I'm living in this smaller community, and I don't really know anybody. So I was just a mess, right? So I get like introduced to Anna, that's her name. And she would take me home like on the weekends to the farm in Burlington. And I would like ride cows and motorcycles and like we just did like real things, which is something like I never, got to experience. Most of my clothes came from like donation and our food was definitely like commodities, government cheese, things like that. And so like I got to see like how a real family like kind of operated a little bit and I just loved, like going home with her and feeling a part of. And eventually, my aunt had a mental breakdown. She ended up in the psychiatric unit. And when she got out, she was like, I just can't care for you anymore. I have to care for myself, right? And at that age, I didn't understand that, right? It's just another person that was abandoning me. Um, but I went to live with Anna, who happened to live with her sister and brother. And they eventually became foster parents for me, and they were going to adopt me. And during my time there, for 3 years, I lived with them. I went to private school, played sports, like every sport that I could. I learned how to play piano. I like really felt for the first time in my life like a little bit of safety, but I still didn't feel like I was lovable. And I would do anything within my power to kind of like test the waters, right? I'd be like, what can I put these people through to like have them prove to me that like I'm lovable? And so like that whole like pushing everybody away that wants to like be in your life. And eventually it came down to like the adoption, and I stopped it. I felt like I remember really very distinctly at the age of 14 going into my freshman year that if I was adopted by these people, who would take care of my mom? Like who's going to save Ellie, And so I like stopped it and I was like, I gotta take care of my mom, even though they were going to have an open adoption, they were going to prevent me from, but I was 14, and I was very, very emotional, like hadn't begun even exploring like any pieces of that of myself yet. And so we stopped the adoption. Of course, the state of Wisconsin was like, well, you can't just go back with your mom. We need her to do some things like, I don't know, maybe go to treatment or stuff like that and kind of earn you back and, jump through some hoops. And, she wasn't ready to do that. Um, but I moved to a foster home to be closer to her. So like with a family that didn't know me, and so like a new foster home. And they were strict. They were really intense, man. And my mom had moved out of state 2 days before I got there. So like she had like taken off, and now I'm like with some like new family, and they have these kids that like snitched on you if you like stepped out of line. It was so crazy, and I'd like never experienced anything like that. And so I came home from school one day from an assembly, and I had like five pointed stars on my hands, and like the kids like turned me in for like gang affiliation to their parents, and they like locked me up in juvie. And my mom drove up from St. Louis and got me 2 days later. And I lived in St. Louis when I was younger, and so I moved to St. Louis back with my mom, and that was when I started kind of I'd smoked weed for the first time. When I was in the foster home, I like walked into a screen and had this huge like burn on my forehead, and I remember them questioning me, being like, "What happened?" I was like, "I don't know. I didn't see the screen door. Was closed." And it was clear because I had like smoked weed for the first time. But I remember feeling like I had arrived. Like this is like I couldn't wait to smoke weed again. I had seen how alcohol had affected my life, and I really wasn't a person that was like, "Oh, I want to try that." Like I really wanted to stay away from alcohol, and I from an early age I was like, I don't ever want to be like my mom, I don't ever want to do that. And I remember thinking I want four kids too so that I can like raise them the right way, because like we were never protected. And um I moved back to St. Louis. Well, there it was, all bets were off, right? I went to a school that was like, super big, barbed wire fences at the time. Like we smoked blunts and played craps in the bathroom. And so like, and there was like fights every day. And like I lived in a pretty, I lived right next to like the projects. And here's my, like my little house right here, right next to it. So like we we all were going through like the same things. We all had like parents that were struggling or like were poor. And so I really felt like it was the first time in my life that I fit in like with the people that were like going through the same things. And so after some, months and of being there and some gang fights, my mom was like, and shootouts in front of my house. And, I'm like, those are my friends and I'm going to go help them. My mom was like, we're getting out of here. And my mom and dad had never been together. And so my mom's like, had this great idea, like, I'm going to move to Baraboo, Wisconsin. And, I'm going to try it again with your dad. And, there were drugs on the block, right? Like crack and heroin. You moved to small town USA and they got everything. I mean, they just had everything. And when you're the new kid and you're trying to fit in, and usually the people that are going to take you into their world without any questions asked are those that like are maybe considered the outcasts and things like that. So that's what, like I found these friends and I found these people, and they were doing all the things, right? From ecstasy to mushrooms to all the things. And I just was like, I'll try it, like if it makes me feel liked and accepted, like I'll do it. And um I dated this one guy at the time. He was considerably older than me. It's kind of embarrassing at this point because I look at that as predatory behavior today in my life. But like at that time, I thought I was like on top of the world. I'm 15 dating this 21-year-old, and he was into using crack cocaine. And I wanted him to like me, and he's like, try this, and I'm like, okay. And like he's like peeping out windows and like doing all this other stuff. And me, I'm like, what is he doing? Like what, like I could take it or leave it, right? I'm just trying to be liked by this person. Um, and I just remember kind of fitting in a little bit with everybody. We would have like parties in the middle of the fields, and like, everybody would show up. It didn't matter like what, stereotypical like group that you were a part of, or and then I began like selling drugs, right? Like, and my mom had moved back out of state. My dad and mom, that didn't work out. You could have saw that coming from a mile away. And I was living on my own at 15. So I was on my own at 15. It's like selling, had to drop out of school to like make ends meet, move down to North Carolina with some friends. There we got into a lot of trouble. All my friends were older than me. I always hung out with older people, and they were all over 18, and they had taken some checks and passed them and, got some money for them. And I was like, oh, and we got caught. Um, but I wanted to be liked. So I was like, I'll tell them I did it all, right? I'm under 18. I'm not going to get in any trouble, or I'm not going to get as much trouble as you all. And literally I got locked up for like 12 felonies for this like forgery and uttering, and they didn't get in any trouble. And by the time I like get out of jail, and I was in adult jail too, because in North Carolina at the age of 16, like you're considered an adult. But they can't put you in general population. They gotta put you in single cells, because liability. And I got out and nobody was there. They had all left, they'd all done, and so I was all alone, like in this state where I didn't like know anybody. I had gotten into, this trouble. And so I called up, my old foster parents, and they came, they smuggled me out of the state. They're good, God-fearing people, like, but they're like, here's a bus ticket, come back. Um, and I came back, and I tried to do, the things. And, all this time, like, I'm not understanding that, like, I'm have any problems. Like, this was what I was born into. This is what I observed. Like, nobody ever taught me, differently. My entire family uses one thing or another. So like, it was just what was modeled for me, and I thought it was a very acceptable way to cope with things in life, and not understanding like the the trauma coping that I was using substances for. And I felt more normal while under the influence than I did not. um, well, the legal problems began probably about the age of 19, even more so than the North Carolina stuff. I had actually gotten out of a lot of that. Um, and I got my first OWI by the time I was like 19. I got my second because it's not a drop law. So like your first, like if you have any alcohol, you get, and I'd had a beer, drove my friends, cops saw my friends with the open container in the back, and, I get pulled over, and then I admit, yeah, I had a beer. Well, here's your first one. My second OWI was like a year later. Again, not over point 0.8, but I was under 21. My third one, I should have gotten pulled over for. Um, but all this time, like, school has always been a safe haven for me. I always did well in school, even in like St. Louis, like, the kids would be around my desk. When I was 17, I was in school within a school, just trying to finish up like high school, and they put me into college courses instead of high school to like get credit for that. And so after, right before my third, I'd like finished my HSED. I was going to college. Um, and I was going for psychology. Like, that was my goal. Was since the age of 11, I'd wanted to be a counselor. I wanted to help kids that grew up in homes like I did get better. And Anna had bought me this book when I was 11 called Psychology for Kids. And from that day, I was like, that's what I want to do. And it never changed, right? So I was like, I always had it in the back of my mind, despite all the things that got in the way in the meantime, that like, I want to be a therapist. Like, that's all I want to do. So I'd started school again for, my generals. And then I got into Edgewood College, which is a Catholic college here in Madison, for my undergraduate program. And I got my third OWI during that time. And I was able to be on like the bracelet. And I was back living with like my foster parents again. I can just like go in and out of living with them. And I call them mom and dad. We have some different values and beliefs in our life, but like I love them, and they've always shown up for me, right, in different ways. Um, and so I'm living back with them, and I'm on the bracelet. And I took a year off, after that. I was just like, this is really scary to me. Like, I really want to like be a therapist, and I want to, I want to do this. And so I just, stopped everything. I didn't like go to treatment. I didn't like do, any like self-help groups, none of that. I just was like, I'm taking this time off. And so then I decided I'm going to move to Hawaii. In 2004, I had family that lived out there. So I'm going to transfer to school out there. And my boyfriend eventually at the time who I'd been with, he's actually like a grade school crush that we had ended up like connecting later on. And we had been together for a number of years, but we got pregnant accidentally, and we made a decision to terminate. And I think I blamed him, and I wasn't processing my grief. I had like projected all this stuff onto him, and like, I had this Christian background like weighing on my soul and just feeling like I was just this horrible human being. And so I took it out on him, right? And I drank the first time after a year, and you don't realize, like, when you take a break and you reconvene where you left off, like your body can't tolerate like some of that stuff. And so I had a going away party and ended up in detox that night. I don't remember too much of the night. And then, Jeremy came and picked me up, and I'm leaving for Hawaii basically in like a week. And then I go to Hawaii and I end up drinking there and ended up in jail like my first night in Hawaii because I, blacked out, and somebody tried to talk to me to be like, "Are you safe? You're with a strange man." Because I'd wandered off and got feisty. That's what I do, I guess, when I'm in a blackout, which is so weird. Because normally, like, I'm a happy person, and when I start drinking, I'm a happy person, but in a blackout, like, I'm a completely different person. Um, and so that kind of scared me a little bit at that time too. But I didn't put the connection together that it was like the alcohol is the problem or the drugs are the problem. Um, it was like all these other things were the problem, right? I was in a new place and I was scared, and Jeremy was leaving me and I was sad, it was all these things. So Jeremy comes back to the States, and I decide, like, oh, like there's these places open up in Hawaii, like till 4 a.m. and you can go get drugs there. And I started like using drugs to deal with the fact that he left. And then decided, like, maybe I shouldn't stay in Hawaii. Like, the buses had went on strike. I wasn't able to like get the class. They'd promised me all this money out there that they didn't give me. So I was like, I gotta go back home. I gotta get back to Edgewood. I gotta get like back to Jeremy. Like, so I called up my parents again. I was like, can I get a plane ticket? And they sent me a plane ticket. And I came back and I started classes again, and I didn't miss too much. And then I ended up breaking up with Jeremy like a few months later. Again, just not processing that pain and that shame and that anger, and turning it on him and not really um, feeling it. I wasn't feeling it. I just wanted to be angry at somebody else rather than sitting with my emotions. I didn't know how. Um, so then I started dating this other guy, and he was not a good person for me, but I didn't know it, and he was pretty volatile. But again, I didn't realize it. I was just, this person, makes everything great in life, and then like something bad would happen and I'd be like, oh, it's just this or it's just that. And or maybe I need to stop drinking, but it was like him when he was drinking that would like, be abusive. And not only that, it just would become more prevalent when he would. But I thought the world of him at the time, and I think it was just a good distraction again from the feelings that I never like went through with Jeremy, and my pride got in the way because I was like, I just left the love of my life and now I'm with this guy, so I got to make it work. Um, and it was just a bad dynamic. I started using drugs, coping with that relationship, um, and then it just like spiraled from there. And I'm in college still trying to do the thing. And I'd like call Jeremy and he'd be like, Tanya, you've changed. Like, what's going on? And I just couldn't bring myself to like admit that my life was falling apart. Um, and so like I'm going into my senior year of my undergrad, and I got my fourth OWI, and my fifth OWI, leaving arguments with Gary. Like they were really, bad nights. I used to only go out once a week. I didn't drink often, but I would go out on Wednesdays, and then we would end up in an argument, and then I'd be trying to leave. And so I hadn't had a drink for multiple hours, but according to the state of Wisconsin, like at the time, after your third, which I didn't know this, your BAC goes down to 0.02. So basically, you can't drink at all, right? And was under the 0.08, but I was over the 0.02. So I got that one, and then a month later, same thing. So I'm facing my fourth and fifth, and at the time, the fifth was a felony. I know the laws have changed, but I'm going into my senior year of my undergraduate, and I'm facing prison time. And so right before I'm about to start classes, I get the phone call that my 20-year-old brother had died by suicide. And my world just shattered. I had experienced some losses in my life. I had some friends die by suicide in high school. But this was the moment that like took the breath out of my lungs. I'm a big sister. My siblings were my everything. We were very much so trauma bonded. We did everything. We talked all the time. We raised the younger siblings. And like this was the most devastating thing. And I didn't know how to feel. I didn't know how to feel. My first 5 months, 4 months, I think I was numb, and again, I'm still facing my fourth and fifth, right? And that first Christmas, I like went out and I was like, if I find the hardest drug that I can find, if I use it to the best of my ability, then I won't wake up. And I just wanted to be with my brother. And like, you don't always, in grief, you don't only experience like your own grief. You also experience like all of your other ones' grief and like the way that they're expressing it, right? So whether it's anger or it's their own sadness, their own depression, their own increased use, whatever that looks like you're feeling for all of them. And then like my other brother, who I'm like best friends with too, it was me and Jesse and Brian, is like every day drinking like a 30 pack, right? And ending up on roofs and, threatening to take his life. And so, or to die by suicide. And so I'm like scrambling, right? Trying to like keep the family together. And I just was like, if I use enough, like I won't wake up. Well, it didn't work. And I went on like on a 5 days and then I called my foster dad and I was like, I need to sleep. Can you come get me? And so he came and he got me and I slept for 2 days. And when I woke up, they like presented me with treatment options. And I was like, yeah, I don't need that. I need Jeremy back. I need to not live with Gary. I need my brother back, right? Like that will solve everything for me. And so they're like, "Oh, we'll put you in the dorms," right? Well, I was of age, the oldest kid like in the dorms. I could go buy everybody what they need pretty much. Um, and so it just spiraled from there. And I was like, I would take weeks and I would use, and then I would take some time off and then I would use. And it was just that whole last semester when I was supposed to graduate. Plus, I'm facing this, my fourth and fifth OWI. Um, my attorney got it so that I could turn myself in after I was done graduating. And I just didn't go. Like I was too, I was busy like using. Like I was not gonna go to jail. Like that's gonna interrupt like what I'm trying to do here. And it was Huber too, but I had never been to jail for like any length of time. And I was just I was so scared, right? Well, I ended up pregnant during this time. And so when I finally did get caught up, um, with being arrested for being on the run or whatever, I found out I was pregnant while I was incarcerated. And and I was like, this is my time to like have like redeem myself for the other baby. And I don't love this man and I don't care about this. It was like some random person that was selling my drugs for me. And like I I just felt like I could, save, like balance out like the things. And so um come hell or high water, I was gonna have that baby. And I remember really feeling like this baby deserves a mom. Like I never had that. I still don't have that today, but she deserves, like she deserves to have a mom. So the person, the attorney got me out of jail early. I got an apartment. I'm able to finish up my last semester, like at Huber, but still, like, there's a lot of stuff along the way. And so finally, I had this run in with the law that like jeopardized me being able to be a mom and be there for my kid. And it was the catalyst that I needed in my life to say, like, this is it. I remember the last time that I used drugs, which was 17 plus years ago. Um, I had taken some drugs and I felt like my heart was going to explode and that I was going to die. And I remember just praying that like foxhole prayer, right? Like, God, if you get me through this, I swear I'll never pick this drug up again. And I made it through the night. And I was waiting to get in on an alternative to revocation to treatment. And this was August 5th, and I got into a treatment bed on August 7th. So the last time I used drugs was August 5th, 2007. And I began, treatment on August 7th. And I just remember so many things, right? Like the meetings and, go to these things. And I was like willing to try anything. And I was just like thirsty for all the things because I was like, I don't know how to live and like I want to and like I need to figure out all the things. I needed to figure out how to have relationships with people, how to be loved, how to be a friend, how to have a friend, like how to be in, like how to pay my bills, how to like do all these things and I did that, I dove right in and like I at the time, things have changed for me. I chose to like start off in Narcotics Anonymous. Um, and I worked the steps and I had this sponsor and I had this sponsor for many, 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 many years. And I learned so much about myself, like how to love women. I hated women. My mom was the first woman that ever hurt me. And then I felt like I couldn't trust any women. And I also am not like a person that likes to like talk about people. And like sometimes that's how women connect. And I'm like a sports person. And I felt like dudes were always safer. Like dudes were always my best friends because they didn't talk about each other. Not in the same way that some people do. And we would talk about sports and they didn't talk about feelings and that was safe for me, right? So it just worked out. So I always had a lot of like male friends. Um, and so I learned how to like step into like being vulnerable and taking risks with women. And that was really, really powerful for me because the women really are going, not that some of the men that I have in my life, because I still have very good guy friends that I consider brothers today in the recovery community. But the women are the ones that like really show up when, my butt is on fire and I need, people to understand the emotional impact. Um, and so, I decided, I'd finished up with my undergrad and I was stepping into like working in substance use. That I'm going to go back and get my master's degree. And then like the next thing on my like list of like things you do when you live a normal life, whatever that means, is to get married. So like, I found this guy that I thought was great in the rooms and, we were that like recovery couple and all these things and we did all these things together. Um, and I felt like I was doing really, really well at like not being codependent, right? Like people would be like, "Oh, I'm concerned about this," and I'd be like, "Oh, don't come at me with that. Like, go talk to him. That has nothing to do with me." And so he, it turned out he was just not. He was not. I hadn't healed some of the things that I grew up witnessing as a child of a mother that was in and out of abusive relationships. Um, that I was still attracting kind of this thing into my life that I hadn't fixed yet. And so, we get married, and I think everything's great. But the minute that we got married, like everything changed. Like he became another person, like super controlling, like all this stuff. And like I'm going through major pain stuff. I like had some dental work that resulted in like chronic long-term pain. So I'm like dealing with pain management and going to all these doctors and went up to Mayo to try to figure out what's really going on and like brain scans and maybe having brain surgery and like all this stuff. I'm in my master's program. I'm working full time as a counselor. And then I'm contending with, and I worked at domestic abuse intervention services. And I'm like, what am I experiencing? Like, is this for real? Am I projecting this stuff onto him? Is this really happening? Or is this the work that I'm doing? And I was just like, I was a mess. Like, I was so confused what was going on. And it was not that, like, it was him, I thought I was crazy. And so I I eventually like drank. 6.5 years into my recovery, I was like at a water park and I ordered a virgin daiquiri and I was like, I got this. Like my neighbor who I was with was like, I know you don't drink. I know you don't use anything. That's I choose abstinence-based recovery. And she's like, I know you don't drink. And she's like, I heard you order the Virgin. You should take it back. And I was like, no, I got this. And then I drank like 6 more times over the next 5 months. That was very like 1 or 2 glasses of wine. I'd start to feel tipsy and I'd be like, no, I'm good. Like I don't want to be out of control ever again in my life today when it comes to that. But that eighth time, I was angry at him. And I went out of town and I gave my keys up to somebody so that I wouldn't drive my car. And I went out and I went. And when my brother ordered me a shot, because I was with my brother, I was like, I shouldn't do this. Like, I know I shouldn't, like it's been a long time. It's been like now 7 years at this point since I've gotten drunk and I should not do this. But I did it anyways. I was in so much turmoil and emotional pain that it was actually the first time in like a year to 18 months that I felt freedom again. And when I woke up in jail the next day, I didn't know why I was there. Um, I had given up my keys. So I knew it wasn't because I drove, right? I thought maybe I got feisty, probably got into a bar fight, like something like that. Um, but I woke up the next day feeling like I have this freedom in recovery. The freedom that I felt last night for the first time in a while, I had in recovery, and I needed to get back to that place. And so I had made a decision waking up in jail before even knowing why I was in jail and what I was facing, that like there was no going back to drinking. There was no going back to using. There was a way forward. I knew I needed to go, start going to doing the things that I needed to do and surrounding myself with folks that I needed to be around. So I asked the jailer, I was like, what did I do? And they're like, oh, you're all over the news. I was like, oh, great. I'm a counselor, right? Like, and so they sensationalized it. And I got charged with my sixth OWI and fleeing and eluding. So I knew I was facing prison. So I got out. I went to treatment right away out of town because, the news was all over and I needed some space. And I felt peaceful because I was away from dude, right? And it was the beginning of like really peeling back the layers of understanding that like this was not a healthy relationship for me, and this had everything to do with like why I was where I was at the time. Not to say that like they caused me to use, that is not what I'm insinuating. It's I began using to cope with the overwhelming feelings and of confusion and pain that I was experiencing once again in my life. And so I went to treatment, and when I got out, I was like, I'm going to do 120 meetings in 90 days. I'm going to get, this new sponsor, and I'm going to build an army because I know I'm going away, right? And I did that. I went to a ton of meetings, started like surrounding myself with people. And 2 months, let's see, 2 months before I was going to be, I had left my husband in November. I just said, I can't do this anymore. I left for a couple of days, came back. He gave me all these promises. Of course, then I hadn't taken my birth control because I was like, I'm not doing anything that I need birth control with. And so, but when I came back, like, so I find out in December that I'm expecting, and I'm going into prison for sure in February. And so I was faced with this decision, like, do I have this baby now, or like keep prolonging, the legal stuff and then have the baby in the community, or do I have the baby while I'm incarcerated and then he like takes it and then they hopefully won't remember too much. And I don't really like to talk too much about this piece because it's not only my story, right? It is my baby story and it is my child's story. But I can say that like, I went in and I had a baby while incarcerated, and it was the most traumatic thing I've ever experienced. And meanwhile, like I'm fighting for my credentials. I'm an APSW, I'm a CSAC. I'm like fighting for that because I don't want my addiction to take one more thing away from me. And so I was like, found to need to be in the professional monitoring program. So when I got out, I had to do all that stuff. And it was then that I fell into peer support. I'd heard about recovery coaching a few years before. And at the time I was like, what is this? Like, is this a paid sponsor? Like, what's going on? And the person at the time wasn't very like, they weren't a good person. I felt like they were taking advantage of community members, right? So like I had just this like skewed idea of what recovery coaching was. And I went to a recovery rally down at the Capitol that happens annually. And I met up with this wonderful woman, Mandy Southers, who had a table for CCAR recovery coaching. And I was like, I'm gonna try this out. I'm gonna see what this is about. I'm gonna go to the training, like what do they say? Like something before prior investigation, right? Like if you make an assumption prior to investigation, like all it is BS opinion. And so like that's basically what I had. So I was like, I'm gonna see what this is about. And my whole mind opened up, like my whole mind shifted in this training. I was like, where was this? Like this is an experience. Like I get to be with people differently while I walk alongside them in their journey, than any like therapeutic setting, right? Where I'm like meeting with somebody for 50 minutes, documenting, see you again in 1 to 2 weeks. That I can go have coffee and I can do the things. And so I just really fell in love. And again, at the time, I didn't really know what all was going on with my credentials. And so I was like, this is where I belong. And so I had taken the training. I got a call for somebody to come on. I was working at Crisis at the time, so I did get a job back at my field. And I was working in the crisis unit in Dane County. and somebody calls me and says, hey, we got this huge grant to like start this pregnancy project. Um, and nothing like it has been done across the country. Like, what do you think? And I was like, those are the people that I always worked with in the clinic, the people that were like having babies and needed more support and care, and those with, big diagnoses that people, throw around. Like those were all the people that I was like, give them to me, I will support them. And so I was like, this is right up my alley. Plus I know what it's like to have used, or, like during pregnancy in my first, I had used one time. And so I always wanted to support, people who are having this experience during pregnancy. And so I came on very part-time in the beginning to like hire people with lived experience who had had babies during pregnancy and were now in long-term recovery, to link them up with birthing people who are struggling with substance use. And so I developed like that whole program, and it just like grew into more. And eventually I came on like full-time to, supervise all the, at the time we only had like two recovery coaching programs, and it was ED2Recovery. So we were the first ones in the state to do it. We piloted it after Anchor ED on the East Coast. And we had a small grant. It was like two peer providers at the time that were running this. And we had one hospital that we were working with. And now we're in like every hospital in Dane County, plus Jefferson and Watertown. And it's really like expanded so much since the beginning of all of this. And pregnancy to recovery obviously has grown. We now train them as doulas. So our recovery coaches, certified peer specialists who work with birthing people, are now also trained as doulas. So they're working on doula certification through the births that they experience with people. And our programs have like grown from like two to like we have 14 different initiatives now. And um, it's really been a humbling experience. I never ever aspired to be anything other than a therapist, and I still plan on going back. I'm going to open up private practice in March. There's a shortage, and I feel very compelled to fill that need for our community, specifically around trauma work and relationship building. And but I never aspired to like be a director and be a part of like all of these things that the team is doing. They really give me so much hope every day, and inspire me. I learn so much all the time, and really lean to them to like, what do you all think is the best, solution or interventions for these things? And so now we have 20 peer providers that work in various, environments, and consistently work on better pay for peer services. It's one of the barriers, and adequate funding, and um, developed a leadership track, right? It used to be like, supervisors, then peers, and then manager. And now we're like team leads, supervisors, directors. And so hopefully they can like move up. And now we have benefits. When I first started, we didn't have like healthcare, and we didn't have things like that. So a big part of my role has been like advocating for, peer services, always enhancing like supervision and what does that look like, and being open to, what feedback the team has to give and what their needs are, um, as well as, wellness for them. I've worked in a number of environments as a professional, and never, other than this space, do we talk about on a consistent basis self-care and the intentionality behind that. It's not just the word. It's like, what are you doing? Like, what are you actually doing that's tangible? Can you tell me about that? Let's talk about that. And then let me see, like, are you doing that right now? Like, that's the extent of like asking how about wellness in someone's life, is like, what does your self-care look like? Because everything else is none of my business. If they choose to share with me, great, but I don't require that. We don't do like pre-employment drug screening. We're a harm reduction coalition, which means that like, whatever you're doing, as long as it doesn't impact your work and safety in the workplace and of those folks that you're working with, like it's, I don't have anything to say about it. So that's a lot.
That was first off, you have an incredible story. Yeah, I'm just I felt like the full range of emotions as you were sharing, like it was yeah. I You pretty much covered everything that I had on the outline. Um I guess I just want to kind of give you this last opportunity. Like, what would you say to someone who might be interested in peer support or, getting into the field?
I think the thing that brings most of us into this space is passion, right? Like we have so much that we want to give. We feel like we've been gifted something, whatever that looks like, if it's quality of life, it's redemption. Um, like the little girl in me that like grew up without knowing whether or not they were going to have electricity or and had pets, but they weren't pets you paid for. They were like cockroaches and things like that. Like I never thought that I would have the life that I have today. And that comes with a lot of hard work. And so I think the thing that when we're thinking about like how do I step into this space of like supporting others, um, all of our paths and journeys and wellness look different. But we have to have a self-awareness around what we need in order to take care of ourselves. Because the thing I think that we don't talk about enough is the grief in the work that we do because we lose people. And we lose people, I think, a little bit exponentially higher than somebody who's in treatment centers because we meet people where they're at, no matter where they're at in the community. And so, like, that means they can still be using, and we're just helping them use safely. Um, that like you lose people and so that grief can wear on us, but the work is hard. It is hard, and if you don't have a good self-care plan and that you're not lying to yourself about what that means, but that you're actually being honest, and that if you don't have like a team of people, whether it's a team of people at work or a team of people in your life to support you through big things that you are actually willing to lean into when you're struggling, and when they say like I'm worried about you or I see you're getting crispy, that you don't get defensive and you actually hear that's a loving statement that they're sharing with you. That means like maybe I need some time off. And we know that time off doesn't always solve burnout, right? Sometimes it's policy changes, sometimes it's support and agency wide, sometimes, the stigma and resistance and miseducation from community members can really add to that burnout too, right? If you're constantly fighting an uphill battle with like, what does it mean for people who use drugs in this capacity? And you're like always fighting for them to be seen, heard, respected, and treated with dignity, that can wear on us, right? And so we're seeing burnout rates at our agency about 5 years in, which I think the national average is between 2 and 3. But what I'm seeing the most is like 5 is like when people are like really, really struggling. And they could have been like majorly struggling before that, but that's just really what I'm seeing, like the kind of breakdown a little bit. Um, and so I just don't want to have people feeling disillusioned that like like easy work. And but it is powerful work. It is important work. It is impactful. It is meaningful. Like I say it all the time, I set out in this supporting role, 17 years ago with the understanding that if I help one person on their journey, that like my pain was all worth it, right? Like because I will have helped that next person, maybe figure some things out for them because of the things that I experienced. Um, but you get paid in miracles. Like you get to see so many things come into fruition that doesn't show up on a paycheck, right? That person get their license back, that person get their HSED, that person get a college education, or that person get their children back. And you just get to be a part of things that are so much bigger than us, and but mean a lot to us too, because we know what it's like maybe to go through some of that stuff. Um, and so that's what I think of when, I want to be real transparent when it comes to this work is heavy and it is hard, and it's so much easier to do when we have support from our community, from our agencies, from, whatever way, I'm a therapist with a therapist. I believe in that, like as much as we can take care of ourselves and know that we need that we don't arrive anywhere, that we need to consistently be looking at what our needs are, because those will shift depending on every experience that we have with our peers, that we are checking in with ourselves and checking the temperature and understanding what we need so that we can stay in this field if that's what we want to do.
Words of wisdom. I just appreciate that so much. I know it's easy I mean, we get to see a lot of really positive things play out in people's lives, and that's really exciting to get that first row or front row seat. But we also get to see a lot of, not so pleasant things play out, and that can be kind of difficult. Um, I am so inspired by you. You just energize me. I'm currently in school. I want to be a social worker myself. So just hearing your story, I had no idea, obviously I've seen you speak a couple times. I was part of a workshop with Arbor Place. And honestly, you could probably speak to a bunch of things. But I just appreciate your willingness to be vulnerable and share everything that you shared. Yeah, I'm just grateful. Um, I guess, do you have anything else that you want to share? I almost want to invite you back because I feel like we didn't even get to the stigma piece.
Ugh, I could talk for days on lots of things about all of the stuff that I've learned and over the past 7.5 years in this space. It's been a wild ride. It's been a journey. It's been hard. It's been, I'm not gonna lie, this year is probably the hardest year that I've ever um faced in here. We've lost some pretty great people, and there's things I think that because we don't have an ethics board and peer support, that there are things that happen and that we have to take care of internally. And sometimes I feel very strongly that like some of these people should not be able to probably harm others in the way that they've harmed them, in the way, like in the future. And so I wish at times there could be more that's done to prevent that from happening. Because certainly, when it came to my credentials, um, I was held accountable, even though I
Right,
hadn't like harmed any people that I was working with or anything like that. And I don't fault, them for that. I'm grateful that I had the opportunity to um, prove myself to be able to, you know, do the work and earn those credentials. And I'm grateful to say I passed my LCSW this year, and that was, a long time coming because my consequences kind of put that happening earlier kind of on the back burner, but I just, continuing to work towards that. So I'm not, when I speak to the challenges that happen in the peer space, I'm not talking about like a return to use that was catastrophic or anything
right,
like that. I'm talking about like, theft or using with people that we work with, or, selling drugs to people that we work with, or sleeping with people that we work with. It's just, there are things that happen in this space that are just, I think not talked about enough. And as I meet with leaders across the state, it is happening everywhere. And I just I don't know that there's much recourse right now for ensuring that the elder vulnerable folks, because we are too, for people with lived experience, that we are serving, but we are in positions of power, right? That they are kept safe moving forward. And I feel very strongly about that. And then the grief in the work, as I shared, like um, we're just beginning to like really understand, there's clinicians that have been doing this work forever, and, like first responders and law enforcement and things like that. We just had a school shooting, and really being able to be like, what do you need? And then the other piece is like, are you willing to access that if it is available to you?
right,
Um, or do you take well, I'm X, Y, and Z, I shouldn't need the support. Because that takes a lot of humility too, right? To be able to say that, like, I may be a supporting person, but as a person that's supporting others, I also need support and I deserve support. And the ability to lean into that, when you're going through big things, whether they're personal or professional. Because I think whatever affects us in our personal life, definitely, like there's no way for us as like the feeling people that we are to be able to like say like, oh, I'm gonna leave that at the door. Like
yeah,
that's
right.
old school stuff. And like that just doesn't, it doesn't, we bring ourselves everywhere we go. We bring ourselves to the table in this work. And so I think that we just need to be having more conversations about a lot of the things, because now we have more experiences. This is a newer thing, like 7, 8 years, where it's been around for a long time. Peer support has, but like really gotten some traction where we
Right.
now have entities and more embeddedness, that like we need to be talking now more about like how do we sustain the efficacy and the strength of those that have really built this up, so that those who are making the mistakes in this space aren't the ones watering down the work of everyone else.